Welcome to the Lurie F.A.F.O show. We have been talking about a segment on this show that I kind of enjoy a little bit because I'm petty, but not really because it's dangerous. And the segment is called F.A.F.O with Lurie, right? Fuck around and find out. We are in that moment, and it feels like I should just preemptively say, my audience knows that I'm petty. I've said that I've owned my petty on a regular basis. But when it comes to the F.A.F.O reality, I only take a little bit of joy out of F.A.F.O because the reality is, even as we're kind of tee-heeing and kikiing about the fact that a whole lot of people who voted one way are about to find out, we're all going to find out together. It just so happens that some of us knew this was coming. So as I was mentioning to the audience yesterday, I was at the grocery store last night, looking at all the groceries and thinking about how so many people talked about how the price of groceries was what it was that made them the most committed to voting for the Republicans, because they believed that the Republican Party was going to be concerned about their economy and was going to do something to fix their personal economy because the price of groceries were too damn high. We heard it everywhere. And even though the candidates both had an option to present policies and only one candidate presented a policy that was specifically speaking to the needs of the working class, most of the white working class decided to vote with the Republicans. So, and some others. But what I think is important is for us to look at exactly now that they are in office, what is it that Republicans are planning to do to help your economy? And before we even get to the part about what Republicans are planning to do to help the economy, I just want to be clear that we are entering an era where talking about white identity politics is going to be extraordinarily important, because when you don't talk about white identity politics, things don't make sense. And as Neely Fuller Jr. said, when you don't understand white supremacy, what it is and how it operates, everything that you think you understand is only going to confuse you. And just before the election, Bill Clinton, who is a white man, former President Bill Clinton, he said that when it comes to the economic, social, and psychological differences that people are experiencing, Bill Clinton said that some of the voters who are backing Donald Trump need to be more honest about what's driving them. And Bill Clinton said it's also true that if you grew up like I did in a white working class family in the South and felt that the only people who were below you, if you will, were black, and you might not have known that the only way to hold on here was to not have too much progress of black folks and what they're allowed to get. So what Bill Clinton is saying is that what was driving a lot of white people, and we got to talk about white people explicitly because they often get excused from conversations dealing with race. Whiteness is a race, not that we created it. White people created races in terms of the human race being broken down into these colored categories, but and I do mean colored because they had, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid. They did the thing. The Carl Linnaeus and the other white scientists who created this system of race. And Bill Clinton there is talking about the fact that white identity politics is at the heart of what was driving a lot of white voters who, despite the fact that Donald Trump did not ever say anything about what he was going to do for them, just felt like it was going to be in their best interest to vote for the Republicans. And to be clear, if white interests, if white supremacy and white identity is your prevailing interest, well then yes, you voted correctly. You should have voted for Donald Trump if your interests in whiteness are the most important interests that you have. Now, that might be even though you need health care and you ain't got no dental care and your teeth is falling out your mouth. It might be true even if you need housing and you can barely afford to keep a hold of the house that you in and you've worried about eviction. It might be true that even if you need a job and you're worried about having access to jobs, that all of these things might be true for you. But if you are white and you are committed to white identity and committed to sitting at the top of the white hierarchy, even if you ain't got shit, then you voted correctly. But now let's talk about the F.A.F.O. Because your white identity was so important to you that you put people in power who right now, according to The Guardian, according to The Washington Post, according to Common Dreams and a number of other outlets, which I'll be sharing with you from today, the Republicans are in fact talking about poor and working class people's economy. They absolutely are talking about this. And you know what they're talking about it for? Because they plan on making the tax cuts for the billionaires that they started out with in Donald Trump's first administration, which expire next year in 2025. You know what they're trying to do? Make those tax cuts permanent. It was $1.9 trillion in tax breaks that they gave to billionaires and millionaires during the COVID pandemic when ain't nobody had nothing. When people who had cars and houses were for the first time finding themselves in food lines. Remember that? Well, Donald Trump and the Republicans and his economic advisors and those in Congress are discussing how they want to make cuts to Medicaid. They want to make cuts to food stamps and other government welfare programs. Why? Because you voted for it. They told you this is what they were going to do. They only had an economic plan for the wealthy, and they told you that that's what they were going to do, and now they're going to do it. But it's a little more pernicious than that, because they want to cut Medicaid, food stamps, and other government welfare programs to cover the cost of extending those multi-trillion-dollar tax cuts. Not for you, poor whites. Not for you at all. For the wealthy people. The wealthy people that you think one day you will be, but I'm guarantee you, you shall not. Now, the cuts basically mean that they would include new working requirements and spending caps, according to the Washington Post. They would extend the cuts, which, again, are supposed to expire next year and would have expired under the Democrats, because the Democrats talked about the fact that they wanted these tax cuts to expire because that's how Kamala Harris was going to pay for all the things. Remember, she said she was going to give you $25,000 to buy your first home. Remember, she said she was going to give you $50,000 to start your business so you could have tax deductions. Remember when she said she was going to give you $6,000 for your child's first year of life of living and then extend the monthly payments vis-a-vis the child tax credit? Remember when she had the apprentice programs? Remember all those programs? And people kept saying, how are you going to pay for it? And the answer was, we're going to let those tax cuts expire. Well, they're not going to expire thanks to you who voted in your white supremacy interests. I hope you like the taste of white supremacy, because for some of y'all, that's all you're going to eat. I know y'all like to think that black people are the ones that most be on welfare, but baby, numerically, it's y'all. It's white people who need these support services and these programs. So extending the tax cuts, which again, supposed to expire next year, will also be adding $4 trillion to the national debt. Now, a whole lot of you said your groceries were too high and you didn't like the amount of debt that the American nation was carrying. So now you're going to add an additional $4 trillion to it. And since the current debt is at $36 trillion, we're going to be at about $40 trillion by the time Donald Trump and all of you white identity voters get done. I hope whiteness can fix your teeth, because you're also going to lose your health care. Yeah, you're going to lose your health care. One of the things that we know from the Washington Post is according to one GOP tax advisor who says, I don't think that passing just an extension of the tax cuts shows a paper increase in the deficit is going to be challenging. The other side of the coin is you start to add things to reduce the deficit and it gets more politically challenging. So where are they going to go to reduce the deficit? They're going to go to the programs that you poor people needed. They're going to go to the programs that you working class people needed. And they're going to cut those programs because you've already demonstrated you don't care about actually having the programs. What's most important to you is whiteness. You don't care about having SNAP and benefits for poor people. You don't care about housing programs. You don't care if you're driven into the streets as long as you're white. And that's good for you because now you're going to get exactly what you want. Now, Republican leaders have been talking about extending these tax cuts for a while, but they're actually kind of concerned that they're going to lose revenue because when you add to the deficit and you can't pay for it, you got to start cutting somewhere. And so they feel pretty confident that because white voters are going to support any sort of abuse because they are the ultimate mark. You are the ultimate, you're the mark. I know you don't like to acknowledge it, but you are so committed to your whiteness that you just voted to give away your entire economic system. And you pretended to do it because of groceries. And you are basically proving Lyndon B. Johnson correct when he talked about the poorest white man. We're going to get to that quote in just a minute. But the reality is right now, white rich people recognize that they can do whatever they want to white poor people because white poor people are more committed to whiteness than anything else. And as Lyndon B. Johnson said, if you can convince the lowest man, that would be you, poor whites, working class whites. And I know a lot of y'all think that you're a wealthy white. Honey, if you're not making $400,000 a year, ain't nobody talking about you or to you. You are working. You are a part of the working class, and 400,000 is a high number for a lot of our communities. But the reality is, baby, you got some problems ahead. But if you can convince the lowest white man, which is you, average white voter, that he is better than the best colored man, then he won't notice you're picking your pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you. And that's what you did, white voters. You emptied your pockets so that you could keep being white, but you ain't gonna have shit. Now, here's the problem. Y'all don't do too well under those conditions. We've seen this before. Y'all don't navigate these conditions too well. Now, you're not actually used to being on the bottom of things and not having access to things. And so people who are used to these things, they going to be all right. I mean, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. But the reality is, the fuck around and find out quotient, you're the mark. You're the one that allowed them to be able to do this. You are the one that gave them the keys to cut Medicaid. And I know a lot of you thought that when they were going to cut Obamacare, that wasn't going to hurt you at all. And a lot of you fought for them to cut Obamacare, even though you're really glad about your Affordable Care Act medical benefits, which include your health care. It also includes your dental care. It includes glasses and your eye care. Remember how President Biden and Vice President Harris, they expanded the Affordable Care Act program to include mental health therapy. So you were going to get your mind, your soul, your whole body. You were going to get from the rooter to the tutor. You were going to have access to benefits. Remember how excited we were about insulin being capped at $35, which is something the Democrats did, and how they had a plan to cut the prescription costs going forward for all people who are receiving Medicaid. And remember how much more money that put in your pocket? Well, white voters, you F.A.F.O'd, and you're going to F.A.F.O your way into a new reality, because when you were arguing for them to cut Obamacare and now they're talking about cutting Medicaid, that might seem a little odd to you. And now that they're talking about cutting the Affordable Care Act, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, that's not what I voted for. I voted for Obamacare to be cut. Well, surprise. Surprise. Obamacare is the Affordable Care Act. The only people who called it Obamacare were the Republicans, and they named it Obamacare because they know y'all don't like Obama, and because y'all don't study and you don't read, and you're a part of the 50% of Americans who can't read beyond a 6th grade level. You're not too bright. And I know that that might be offensive to some of you, but we've sort of handled your fragile feelings for far too long, and we got to move on into reality now. And so the reality is, when you were fighting for Obamacare because you didn't like the black man that gave you health care and allowed you to get some teeth and them gaps in your mouth that you finally were able to get as a result of having dental care, you're not going to have to worry about it anymore, because they're cutting those programs too. And because I'm petty, I told you so. I told you that this was going to happen, because the Republicans did indeed say that they were going to cut all the benefits. They put it in a document of almost 930 pages. It was 922 pages to be exact. And that document was called Project 2025, and a project that we went through extensively. And a lot of you thought it wasn't going to be nothing. And yet some of these things should be sounding very familiar to you, because what you should know is that everything we told y'all was going to happen, it wasn't that we were soothsayers. It wasn't that we were able to just look off into the future and determine what was going to happen. It's because we read what they said. And what they said was they was going to cut everything to pay for the tax cuts for the billionaires. And now they are cutting everything. You fought, and now you fold. And you ain't going to have housing. You ain't going to have medical care. You ain't going to have dental care. You ain't going to have mental health care. You ain't going to have a job. You ain't going to have no place to complain, because I guarantee you they also going to be cutting some of them job support centers, because that also relies on money and agencies that they plan to cut. You fucked around. Now you get to find out. They meant what they said. We told you. But when your whiteness is more important to you than food, don't complain to us about the price of groceries, because you voted to have your economy utterly destroyed so that you could sit in the hoity spaces of whiteness. I hope that whiteness keeps you warm, because, child, you ain't even going to have enough money to heat up your house after these folks get through with you.